Hi everyone! So lately I played a lot of Diablo 3 again. That came a bit to my own surprise and to that of my viewers, I suppose. But they have started season 34, which actually came with a really cool season theme, the Sanctified items. Now, I'm not here to advertise the season directly, but I have uploaded a bunch of videos on that. I did a bunch of rank 1 clears on various Demon Hunter and Monk sets, for example. Had a good time for like 1.5 weeks or something like that. And that kind of prompted me to think about the differences between Diablo 3 and Diablo 4, which is the actual topic of this video. A lot of people have been saying that Diablo 4 has become Diablo 3.5 or just the next Diablo 3 or something like that, and on some extent that is actually true. In fact, the developers have even said that themselves, and you can definitely see the Diablo 3ification of Diablo 4 right now, especially with the expansion Vessel of Hatred. We have gotten a whole rework of the difficulty system that closely resembles Diablo 3's. And we also have lots of similar mechanics and systems in the game. There's now the armory, we have the pit, which is kind of like greater rifts, and lots of other similarities. On the other hand, I guess Diablo 4 has also managed to carve out its own space in the RPG genre with this open world features, hell tides, and these kind of things, which are definitely quite unique in the genre, at least for like the more popular games. And I think there is definitely also reason to see Diablo 4 as its own thing. But one thing specifically I want to talk about here is the high end of the two games, Diablo 3 and Diablo 4. In the 3, what you can see right now, we have those greater rifts, and well, I have built effectively my entire career on trying to chase those rank 1s on the leaderboards, pushing solo greater rifts. So this is what I have been doing for the last decade. This is how my stream blew up. This is how I have been creating content and made thousands of videos over the last years. And it has just been a really great journey. Now these days, yeah, I'm not really doing much D3 anymore. In fact, I've actually skipped a few of the latest seasons and didn't play them at all, or I just played them much less. So, instead of like 600 or 800 hours, I put like 50 or 100 into a season. But yeah, it's just kind of the changing times. We have new games, we have Path of Exile 2, Diablo 4, and I'm just kind of busy with those titles instead. And I feel like Diablo 3 has mostly run its course now that it's also not really getting developed anymore. But it still offers something that no other ARPG really has, which is this pushing mode that just doesn't exist in even Diablo 4. We have the pit, we have a very similar system with tiers that go all the way to 150, which is the same number as Diablo 3 Greater Rift tiers, for example. But it still just doesn't really feel the same. It doesn't feel right. And I've been trying to pinpoint that a bit more precisely. So what I want to talk about here is the differences between Diablo 3 and Diablo 4 when it comes to builds, the strategy involved, and also the feeling and the satisfaction that you're getting from pushing greater rifts versus the pit. I have done both to a large degree. Obviously Diablo 4 less than Diablo 3 since it's relatively fresh still, and I also just don't feel that motivated in Diablo 4 to do it, and well, there are reasons for that I'm about to explain. Before we continue with the video, I want to give a shout out to today's sponsor, boot.dev. They've created a platform that makes it easier than ever to get into programming and polish your skills. They believe that the easiest way to learn code is to make sure that you're never bored, and this is why they have designed their courses to feel more like a game and less like a chore. The only way to really get into programming is to get your hands busy and write a ton of code, and this is exactly what the tasks allow you to do without ever feeling like you're getting stuck, because they have tons of tools to help you out. In these courses, you're going to learn backend programming from start to finish in the Python and Go languages. As you may know, programmers have huge earning potential. In the US, the median is upwards of 100K per year. And additionally, they can very often work from home, which is very convenient. And what I find really admirable about boot.dev is that they really follow their mission. Even for people that don't have the means to pay for a membership, they offer all of their content for free to read and watch. The paid membership only unlocks the interactivity and the game that goes with the programs. Compared to attending a university course, boot.dev is a way cheaper solution and allows you the flexibility of doing it all at your own pace and from home. They offer both a monthly and annual subscription, and you can cancel in the first 30 days, no questions asked. So if you really want to learn coding and that convinces you, then go check out boot.dev with the link in the description or the pinned comment below, and you get 25% off your first payment to boot.dev by clicking that link or using my code. And now, let's go back to the video. So let's get into it. When we look at Diablo 4 and the meta and just generally how the pit works, it is actually quite different from how Diablo 3 worked. Just the mechanics in the game are kind of very different. For example, in Diablo 4, you have not really that many options to, skip packs, to make large pulls like you do in Diablo 3. You have just seen that clip earlier from me pushing, for example, an Natalia set in D3, where I just pulled like 5 different elite packs together next to the conduit pylon. That thing doesn't even exist to the same degree in Diablo 4. And while we have been moaning a lot about the, RNG requirement and the, fishing involved with Diablo 3's pushing, it has gotten a lot better in the last years when we have gotten the final patches with the Oryx Dream, for example, which is kind of like the push mode. And that doesn't actually take that much time to really get a good and useful run that you can attempt where you have a realistic chance of clearing it, depending on how far you want to stretch your goals, of course. In these games, you always have the option to just fish even a little bit harder, get an even better map, and then try to edge out that one last tier of difficulty that you could otherwise not complete. This is just the nature of the game, and this is also what we have accepted this to be. So there's nothing you can really do about it, no matter how much you try to streamline the RNG and the difficulty and the monster types. There will always be, certain things that work better for certain builds, a certain boss that is, just easier to kill or faster to kill because of various mechanics. And we can't really, just streamline it all to the point where it's all the same under all circumstances. They have actually tried to do that, for example, with the challenge rifts or the gauntlets. And both these systems were just not really adopted. They were not really fun, where, there is no RNG involved at all. There actually needs to be RNG so that you can constantly adapt to a new gameplay situation, which is what makes this pushing actually fun. Because, there are different elite packs that have different qualities, different affixes, and they are in a different map. Every situation is a new situation, even after playing 50,000 Greater Rifts or something like that. There's always something new. And this is something that Diablo 3 does, for example, a lot better than Diablo 4. In Diablo 3, there's a lot more RNG, which means there is more fishing potential, but it also means that you just get like these bigger highs and lows compared to Diablo 4. I feel like when I play Diablo 4, for example, here my clip of me clearing the 150 in hardcore with my Necromancer, I felt like most of the runs were kind of the same. Most of the elite packs were kind of forgettable. They don't really do anything. They don't really, promote me to play differently or something like that. And then there are other mechanics in Diablo 3 that also make the gameplay much more interesting, which is the pylons, for example. In Diablo 4, we have the shrines, and they are much, much less impactful than the pylons are in Diablo 3's Greater Rifts. And I think this is actually a downside. I think it would be way more fun if there were actually, a variety of really impactful, cool pylons that require you to kind of think about them, require you to strategize around them. We have that in Diablo 3, especially with the Conduit Shrine, for example, that allows you to kill several elite packs at once, which is kind of like the main requirement of finishing a high tier, like a rank 1 push or something like that. Every one of those will have a conduit pylon, but it's also relatively consistent to get one. It's roughly like a 50-50, so you can clear a run and not get one, and clear another one and you get one. So that's kind of how it works, and most of the time getting one will also allow you to kind of play around it in a way that makes the run way more interesting, because whenever this one pops up, it might be more towards the start of the run, it might be more towards the end of the run, it might be in a certain spot where, it's like difficult to actually like pull all the elites to, versus, other times there is just like 4 elite packs right next to it. This is also what I meant with this ever-changing situation that just keeps you on your toes when you push. So it's exciting to try to play around it to the best of your abilities with the tools that you're given, trying to chase that clear. And when I play Diablo 4, I just don't really have the same feeling. I don't really get the impression that this is how this is supposed to be working, this is how it's designed, or maybe the developers just like unintentionally made it that way because they have streamlined Diablo 4 too much. In Diablo 4, you just don't have those shrines that really turn and run around, that, really require you to think about them. In fact, when I played most of those builds, like most of those shrines don't even do anything. Like Protection Shrine, Like, you're not really expected to die in most builds, for example. Like, it doesn't really help you with anything. Channeling Shrine, kind of the same story most of the time. Your resources and the cooldowns are kind of figured out, so who really cares? And yeah, Artillery Shrine, most of the time you have the attack speed cap already. The effect of the, arrows doesn't really do anything. Same with the Blast Wave. So basically all of the shrines that we have in Diablo 4 are completely worthless versus Diablo 3, where it's kind of the opposite. Okay, there's the speed and also the channeling that may not really be that helpful, but it still has an impact. It still spawns an elite pack, for example, from the Nemesis Bracer, at the very least. Or it just might be good for your build and you might get a bit of a benefit. Or you can combine this shrine with another shrine that spawned next to it if you save it up a little bit. And then you have the Shield Pylon, which is just very strong for most builds that run, for example, the Squirt's Necklace. And then you have, obviously, the Conduit and the Power that are really impactful and really allow you to strategize around them. So in general, there are a lot more dynamic elements in Diablo 3 gameplay, and it's not just the shrines, it's also the items and the builds themselves. As I mentioned, for example, Squirt's Necklace is part of many builds that actually rewards you for good gameplay. It rewards you for not getting hit for a consecutive amount of time by giving you a bigger damage buff, and a lot of builds run that in Diablo 3. In my opinion, in fact, this is probably the best designed item in any Diablo game ever, because of how much it promotes skillful gameplay. Now, some builds can't use it because they have to run another neck, or just don't really have the opportunity to actually stack it up. For example, like a Whirlwind Barb or so doesn't really make great use of that thing outside of maybe the boss fight. But then again, there comes the boss fight, and you actually try to keep it up because you can try to do that on most bosses, and then suddenly we have like a much larger skill element involved that makes these fights way more interesting. You have to try to not get hit at all the entire fight in order to maximize your damage output. And this suddenly makes it a lot more fun, in my opinion. And you also have, for example, a bigger value from the shield pylons. When you click the shield pylon, you have 2 minutes of guaranteed full squads uptime, and you can play completely differently. You can actually strategize around that on most builds and really make the most out of it. And then there are other dynamic elements that make the gameplay more fun. Ocular Sync, for example, is always on your follower on every single build in Diablo 3. And this also means that you have to move around, you have to sometimes time a kill so that you get the Oculus Ring right before your big burst, and then you jump in there and you try to pull the enemies in because you don't know where it appears. And this also allows you to just kind of like have more dynamic gameplay. And I feel like all of this stuff is just completely missing in Diablo 4. We do have really good gameplay, we have really fun builds, but when it comes to pushing where the gameplay slows down a lot and you actually fight, single elite packs for like a minute or something like that, most of the time it's just kind of like you stand there, you tank and spank, and nothing is going on. In fact, even in the boss fights where we're supposed to have this very punishing tormented stacks mechanic where you get like these stacking damage debuff, these days, for example, we just removed that with the Hex of Whispers, for example, in most builds. Or most builds just don't really care. They're just tanky enough to even survive the hardest hitting boss abilities with 3 stacks up, and they just stand there and don't really do anything on the boss fight. So you see me here right now running around and all this stuff, but I'm fairly certain that if I tried, I could probably just tank everything anyway. And I just did that because I knew I had enough time and finished the boss anyway. I think another really important factor that comes into play here is also that Diablo 4 is just so power crept right now. Now, you could say the same thing about Diablo 3, where we have many seasons now where people have been playing solo Greater Rift 150s and so on. But the thing is that in Diablo 3, especially with the leaderboard attached, there is always an incentive to try a bit harder, to push a bit further. And that especially means that you can't just make your character like infinitely tanky. You have to go for DPS, and you have to actually play around very dangerous mechanics that the elites throw at you. In Diablo 4, I feel like I'm never really threatened by anything, especially since the expansion. I think there is just not really much going on. Most of the elite affixes don't really hurt you. If you compare to, for example, Diablo 3 pushing, you can see your life going like roller coaster sometimes, and you have to be really on your toes to survive fighting 3, 4, 5 elite packs at once, which is something that you cannot even possibly do in Diablo 4. In Diablo 4, there's this leash mechanic that if you pull enemies too far away from their original spawn location, they will just like run back. In Diablo 3, this does not exist. You can pull the entire map together if you want. It will take some time depending on the build, depending on, if you can pull them actively with like some abilities or something like that, or what kind of monster types they are. But there is just a lot more stuff going on, and you actually have to worry about, like these arcane beams and then the frozen explosions, and also the monsters just hitting you, the thunderstorms coming down, and at any moment you always have to adapt to something new, where in Diablo 4 it's kind of the opposite. You kind of just like walk up to a pack, maybe you pull the next pack together with it because that's basically all you can do, and then you just tank and spank because you're invincible anyway. So this is kind of like how I feel about the differences in the two games as well. There is just no threat. There is like nothing to really worry about in Diablo 4. And that makes pushing those high tiers really boring, because it's fine that fights are long. In fact, in Diablo 3, for example, most builds, when they go to like an appropriate high push tier, you can't even kill any elites on your own. Or maybe you can do so if it's like a good monster type that follows you through an entire map, and you have like, a big open map like this one here. And then you fight the elite for 7 minutes until eventually it dies from the area damage while you actually clear the rest of the map or something like that. And this is okay, because we have the content to clean up, and also it kind of like ramps up the difficulty as you go. Like you start out, you go into the map, and then there's the first elite pack, and you start kiting it, you clear some trash, you start kiting the elite further, oh, there's a second pack, and now, it kind of keeps ramping until you have 3 packs, 4 packs, 5 packs, and just kind of gets crazier and crazier. And nothing of that really exists in Diablo 4. Every fight is pretty much interchangeable, the same. It's like, okay, there's like 1 pack of 3 guys, or there's 1 dude with 3 affixes, and okay, maybe there's like another guy next to them, and that's about it. I feel like there is like a whole like world of dynamic that is missing in Diablo 4's combat when it comes to high tier pushing, and it just becomes extremely boring extremely fast, because they're just like damage sponges basically. You just keep blasting into the packs and wait until they die, and there's not really that much going on besides, actually pressing your buttons in the right order. Where in Diablo 3, you constantly have this, shift between, first the like items that I mentioned, like Oculus, Squirts, and so on, but also the elites actually being a real threat to a character, because you can only build so much defense on those builds. Now, there are builds that are a bit more defensive than others, and some are actually very tanky, some are very squishy, but this is kind of like how it goes. But in Diablo 4, like squishy builds don't actually really exist, I guess, at this point. Maybe it's just like a matter of tuning, where monsters just don't deal enough damage, but this is basically how I feel. In fact, since the expansion launch, I've played, I don't know, 1,000 hours of Diablo 4 or something like that, and I have not lost a single character. I have not even come close to dying, I think, in any circumstances, and I'm not really just like, praising myself here or something like that. It's more like there is no threat. Like, I play hardcore all the time, and I just feel like I can't lose characters basically at this point. So this is where we're at. Even when I go into the pit 150 on Diablo 4, like it's just, yeah, kind of the same low difficulty that we experience anywhere else in the game. And the only thing that is really left to, compete with is just like a DPS check in the end. So it's mostly a gear check, I think, in Diablo 4, because most builds are relatively easy to play. There's very little strategy compared to Diablo 3, where you have builds that have rotations, and you have to do timing, you have to think about how you can best utilize area damage, how do you pull the elites together, how do you use the Oculus rings, how do you keep up the squirts, and so on. And in Diablo 4 there's nothing of that. You can't really do much. Now, of course, you can do things better or worse, and you can make right and wrong decisions, but the difference is night and day. Like, Diablo 3 is in a completely different galaxy when it comes to greater rift pushing strategy. In fact, for people that have known the Diablo 3 Max Roll site, I actually have this Greater Rift pushing post here that explains a lot of these details that I wrote years ago at this point. And that is actually, I don't know, maybe like a 20-page article that explains, with graphs and, RNG and like harnessing, builds, harnessing, you know, like everything that the game gives you basically. And there's tons and tons and tons of information in here. I actually have a video that is like 80 minutes long describing like every single like, you know, scenario that you can find yourself in with different builds against different monster types and bosses and maps and all that kind of stuff. So I made this kind of content in Diablo 3, and I'd really love to do that kind of stuff in Diablo 4 again, but I feel like it just doesn't exist. Another really huge factor here is also, for example, that in Diablo 4 there's only 2 floors in the pit, and that kind of forces you to just clear everything that you find. You don't really have any decisions to make. You can't skip anything because you might just run out of progression. In fact, that happens pretty regularly, even when you're farming, when you're one-shotting everything on the screen. Not just in pushing, where, you know, you have to backtrack sometimes for like a minute or something to find like the last elite in the last corner somewhere, because there's not even enough monsters to spawn the boss until you have actually cleared everything on the map. So that is like a huge problem as well that Diablo 4 has, where compared in Diablo 3, for example, you have 10 floors in an Aura Extreme. You can choose to just run past an entire floor, go to the next one, and hope to get something better if whatever you find, you know, in the middle of the run doesn't actually suit you. If you have a mobile build, or you have enough time, or, you know, maybe floor 1 was really good and you actually got like ahead a lot, you can afford to sometimes make those decisions and just go to the next floor. And yeah, you know, obviously it would have been better off getting a run where that floor that you skipped just didn't exist, right? It can happen. There's always a better rift that you can fish for, but you know, most of the time it's fine actually to do this, or to just kind of like, you know, make 1 or 2 good pulls on the map that is not really to your liking, and then move on more quickly, instead of, for example, trying to actually full clear an entire map because it's so good. So again, there is more decision making to make, more strategy in Diablo 3, and something that is completely missing in Diablo 4. And not just that, but Diablo 4 pits are actually actively frustrating because of this. As I mentioned, even in farming, you have this issue very often that you just run out of monsters, and it's extremely annoying. And I think this is something that needs to be addressed very quickly. If nothing else, we need to get at least 1 more floor or something like that added, so that we consistently don't have to backtrack, and, you know, like it just ruins the fun, it ruins the flow of the game. And in pushing, it's even worse because you just have no choices. Like, you can not skip anything, you cannot make decisions, you have to deal with what the game throws at you, and it just makes it even more mindless and even more like just a DPS check, and that's it. And then of course come the boss fights. In Diablo 3 we have the Bane of the Stricken. This is a band-aid that was developed at some point in season 4, so many years ago, and that has forever been defining for the push meta, because this is kind of the only way that most builds have any chance of clearing a boss, because of the linear HP scaling per tier. That usually means that your damage in area of effect clear, or like in like big AoE fights, usually goes up as you go into higher tiers, because monsters have longer, meaning you make larger pulls, meaning you hit more monsters at a time, meaning you get more area damage procs. So there is a bit of like an exponential scaling here, and your DPS just ramps the higher you go. Even though there is a 17% multiplicative damage increase per tier in Diablo 3, which is actually fairly similar in Diablo 4 to my knowledge. It just feels a lot better in Diablo 3 to go up and try to push the next tier, because you have the area damage mechanic that allows you to, you know, just kind of be more successful through this exponential scaling against more tough monsters. So bosses get this same HP multiplier, but you don't get any of the perks that you have from making larger pulls and getting more area damage and so on. So this is why Bane of Stricken was invented. And while it was kind of like a pretty lazy band-aid, it has actually solved this problem really well over the course of Diablo 3's history, where any build actually can kill a Rift Guardian after X amount of time, no matter how tanky it is, basically. And that is really a great boon that makes pushing a lot more interesting, because it kind of normalizes the time you spend against bosses. Now, there are still good and bad bosses depending on the build. There are single target bosses, there are AoE or like add bosses in Diablo 3 as well. And some builds want this type, some builds want that type. But it generally kind of evens out the time you spend against the boss, you know, depending on other mechanics as well, like Oculus Rings that can spawn, Squirt's Necklace uptime, and so on. But most of the builds that push an appropriate tier end up with something like a 2 to 4 or maybe 5 minutes boss fight without, you know, any like pylons or something like that. which is like kind of like an appropriate time to spend on a boss. Now in Diablo 4, the time investment for a boss fight is actually somewhat close to that number as well, depending on the build, but probably usually higher than that. I regularly see like these like high tier pushes from other people that have like some of the highest clears on their class or on that build, where you kind of clear the pit really fast in, you know, like 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 7 minutes, and then you spend the rest of the time on the boss. So more than half of the timer is regularly spent on the boss fight itself, because we don't have a Bane of the Stricken mechanic, but we have the same, you know, multiplicative HP scaling with like the same increase in HP for monsters and the boss per tier. Meaning, kind of like how I just explained it, you can always try to get a better map, you can make larger pulls, clear stuff faster, but on the boss you cannot do any of that. You are just bound to fight the boss for many minutes and hope you have enough time. And not only that, but there is a massive range of RNG in the boss fights as well, because of the missing Bane of the Stricken. So one thing I, for example, experienced myself last season that I don't have footage for right now is Rain of Arrows. So that is a rogue build. It relies on staggering the boss. It also relies massively on trick attacks. And you have a huge difference between single target and AoE bosses. I was able to kill, I don't know what tier it was, whatever I was pushing, bosses in like sometimes half a minute. And sometimes 9 minutes. So this is like how large that gap can get, because there is no such mechanic that actually normalizes these boss fights a little bit. If there's a boss fight like Spirit Call of Frost, and you stagger him like 3 times in a row, you have your trick attacks and all of your buffs up, you just kill that boss. And then other times there is no adds, and then you stagger them a few times and you do no damage after the stagger phase is over. There is no adds to give you a buff. And the boss moves around a lot, has a crappy hitbox, and you know, these factors all combined just made the fight literally like 20 times longer or something like that. And I think this should not really exist. This is too much of a gap. It makes it frustrating to even farm with such a build, let alone push on the high tier, because even when farming, you just sometimes run into a boss fight where it just takes like a minute, where other bosses you kill in like 3 seconds or something like that. And this is also just not really a good feeling under any circumstance. So I think that needs to be addressed as well. And I don't really think that we need like Bane of the Stricken 2.0, but realistically, it was actually solving the problem really well back in Diablo 3. And then of course also comes the problem of the just satisfaction and the reward that you get for doing this kind of push. In Diablo 3, you are strongly incentivized to push, because first of all there's a leaderboard, so most people want to try to get high up there or try to get like a better placement than the previous season or something like that. So that is definitely a motivator that Diablo 4 just doesn't have. Yeah, okay, there's like unofficial leaderboards, but no one really cares about them that much when they're unofficial. And there's also, you know, lots of RMT and lots of other shenanigans going on with people abusing all kinds of bugs, exploits and whatever. And okay, they might be filled out. It's just not the same when there's no official leaderboard. So we need something like that in the game. People have been asking for this forever. And of course, there can only be one guy at the top, and you know, very few people, you know, kind of like close to that or something. But I don't think this should be really a reason to not introduce leaderboards. There's also plenty of people that just like looking at leaderboards or just like comparing themselves to what the guys at the top can do, and maybe strive for the same and maybe get motivated to try a little bit more than they would otherwise do. And I think this could just drive engagement a lot more. It could, you know, drive content creation a lot more as well. And there would just be a lot more action going on. There would be like a really tangible goal as well for people to strive for like the highest clears, the best times. And this competition can really bring a lot of longevity to the game that is just really lacking right now. Now, why I think that leaderboards are inevitable to come to Diablo 4 at some point, people have been asking for that for years basically at this point. We really hope that we also get other adjustments to how the pit works. You can't just slap a leaderboard into this system now and then call it a day, because, well, I've explained it. It's just not really fun enough. Even if there was a real leaderboard, people would get really upset and bored of it very quickly, because Diablo 4's design just doesn't really allow for, you know, thousands of hours of, you know, banging your head against the wall to get that highest clear, and you don't really get the same satisfaction when you do it. There needs to be other improvements to the whole system of the pit especially, or maybe whatever else we're gonna get leaderboards for, to really make this more exciting for people to strive for. And of course, another big motivation in Diablo 3 for greater pushing is also that you can, for example, upgrade your gems higher than you could otherwise do. In Diablo 4, your glyphs are capped at 100. And so basically any kind of half decent build can easily get their glyphs capped out at some point. And after that, there is no reward whatsoever for going high in the pit. Yeah, okay, you get like slightly more experience per tier or so, but for pushing, obviously you're not looking for experience. In fact, it's a very bad way of farming experience. Even in Diablo 3, you don't really get that much, where the scaling per tier is actually much higher. So you don't do it for that purpose. You just do it mostly to, you know, prove a point or to, you know, get that new best, like personal best, or maybe get on that leaderboard that exists at some point. And that's about it. It's mostly just to kind of like see how far I can go and not really to get a tangible reward out of it, even in Diablo 3. So that is okay, but at least in Diablo 3, you do be pushing all the way to 150 because there is actually a reason to do it. And in Diablo 4, we don't have that. Now, we have the problem that in Diablo 4, we have a gross imbalance of classes and builds every single season. We have big exploits and big bugs every single season. We have lots of RNT and any kind of, like, you know, cheating going on basically in that regard. So there's a lot of problems to fix in order to really create an interesting, competitive, fair environment where, you know, we can actually use different setups and different builds and all that, and actually feel like we are on like a somewhat even level with them. In fact, it is actually quite interesting to see the community perception of this imbalance from a content creator perspective. For example, like I've been handling a lot of the Spiritborn guides on Maxroll, and Spiritborn was really good in Season 6. Everyone played it, it was the new class, it was, you know, super broken and imbalanced because of various bugs. And now those bugs are fixed. Spiritborn is, you know, still a pretty strong class to my standards, but it doesn't clear the 150s like the Necros do or the Barbs do. And so everyone just thinks that Spiritborn is trash now, even though it's still like one of the best overall classes in the game outside of the pit. So even without the leaderboards and even without a real incentive to go to 150, there's like no reason to do it, there's no reward for it. It's literally just banging your head against the wall for no reason. People still have this, you know, feeling that this class is just so much worse than the others. I don't want to play that because the imbalance is so great. Why does this one do 100 times more damage than the other class? And yeah, I agree. Those are fair concerns. I really hope that Blizzard gets their stuff together and makes a better balanced game, honestly, because there is a lot of build variety in Diablo 4, but with the huge difference of builds, like some of them doing 100, 200, 500 times more damage than others, obviously people will flock to those top builds because it just, you know, makes everything a breeze outside of the pit especially. And some people just kind of like to chase for that high number, like to chase for the biggest damage and the highest pit, even if there is no reward for it. And so they will always have to be forced into like something very narrow, very specific, that is just so much ahead of the curve. In Diablo 3, those things are way better. And of course, there are better builds than others, especially with season themes coming in and sometimes buffing certain builds way more than other builds and so on. So there is definitely a bit of a difference here, but most of the time, you know, all the classes can reach greater than 150 with usually multiple builds. And okay, some can do this a bit more easy or with lower Paragon than other builds and so on. But the overall picture is actually way better balanced. So like, let's say if you look at the majority of builds, they're all kind of like in the same ballpark of like, you know, similar power of like maybe like a, you know, times, you know, 2 or times 3 of another build's power or something like that. And maybe some of the top builds, depending on the season theme, end up, you know, a bit outside of that radius. But it's not like in Diablo 4 where some builds literally do 300 times more damage than, you know, even the best build of the worst class or something like that. So this is just way too crazy. And the balance issues really kind of take the wind out of the sails for a lot of people, I think, especially when they really like a certain class and just want to play that class every single season, and sometimes they just don't come back. You know, they see that this class is completely behind and everything is way harder when you play a Spiritborn right now compared to a Necro or something like that. And people just don't really like that, and they don't want to switch to another class and just gonna skip the season, for example. So there is definitely a huge incentive here as well to balance out the game better, bring more variety in, like kind of like a similar like sphere of performance, for all the different builds, and make sure that we don't have these ridiculous high damage numbers that we see on some of those. So these are pretty much all the points I wanted to talk about here to compare Diablo 3 and Diablo 4. Now, where does that leave us? I do have to say that I generally enjoy Diablo 4 more. It just has a lot more stuff to offer. It is still a lot more fresh to me as well. Okay, I have done, countless of builds by now and every single class. I've kind of explored most of it, but there's also just like more change. Diablo 3, yeah, it is old. I've done everything I can think of, probably multiple times. I've done dozens of meme challenges and all kinds of stuff like that as well. So there's not really much left for me to do in Diablo 3. So I think Diablo 3 is still a very good game to play on like a season launch, for example, but I don't really see myself investing like, 500 hours in a season or so anymore to play something I've already played like, 5 times over anyway. And yeah, I did have fun. I actually really enjoyed my time playing Diablo 3 again, and then I just realized how much I miss, pushing, trying to like optimize my build, optimize my playstyle, try to beat other guys with lower paragons. It's just so satisfying to do this. And I feel like in Diablo 4, I just can't really do any of that. There's just not really a fun pushing mode. There's not really any kind of competitive scene, any kind of, like, there's not even a leaderboard. So what are we actually trying to do here exactly? So I think there needs to be lots of adjustments, both in like, improving the gameplay of the pit, not just for like the high end, like super try hard, sweaty guys that like to push to the highest tiers, but in general for everyone who wants to kind of like measure themselves in the pit, or even just farm the pit. The farming itself could also be improved with what I mentioned. For example, evening out bosses a lot better, or making more floors so they can not backtrack all the time. These kind of little things as well can really make a big impact for every player and not just, people like me, for example. And I certainly think that a lot of people would be more excited to also have a bit more dynamic gameplay with stuff that I described with Oculus rings, Squirt's necklace, and these kind of things, where there is just like something to, like prove your worth, something to get ahead, or, try a little bit harder to get a better performance. And maybe also just get rewarded for doing that. Another problem in Diablo 4, for example, is there's like, as I mentioned, no reward for going in a higher pit. You don't even get more XP really. It's like so little that most of the time you're just better off farming like, I don't know, pit 80 or something as fast as you can, instead of actually going to tier where you have maybe slightly slower runs, but the combat is much more meaningful and you're not just one-shotting entire screens at a time. Like, this is actually not a competitive strategy. Instead, you just want to go like 60-second runs, blast through everything, fly through the map, one-shot everything on site before they can ever touch you. And that also takes away a lot of the, kind of like good dynamic combat that Diablo 4 actually can offer, but just doesn't really. I do have to say though, in Diablo 4's defense, we just have a lot more content in Diablo 4. We don't have just Greater Rifts. Like Diablo 3, let's be real, doesn't have anything besides Greater Rifts really that matters in any way. This is what you spend like 98% of your time on. Yeah, there are bounties and there are Nephilim Rifts and divisions and whatever, like little stuff you can do. But realistically, the entire game is Greater Rifts. And in Diablo 4, this is not really true. In Diablo 4, you do have the open world, you have the Hell Tides, you have the seasonal stuff, and there's a lot of stuff going on and different things to farm. And now all of this stuff just has to be fleshed out more, become more exciting. And I could talk probably about this, same length about any system in the game, like, like the different types of contents, and give my feedback and my, dreams about them, for example. But I guess we got the idea here that stuff just needs to kind of improve in general in Diablo 4. And for example, while I was blasting in Diablo 3 for like those 1.5 weeks on the season start recently, I had so many people come into my Twitch chat or my YouTube chat and talk about their experience like playing Diablo 3 alongside me. And they were all saying like, oh my god, man, I missed this game. Oh, this is so much more fun than Diablo 4. And yeah, on some level that is actually true. Now the thing is that this fun also dissipates much quicker in Diablo 3 because it's like, so just like hyper, fast, and the progression is ridiculous, like even more than in Diablo 4. But we are kind of getting to the point where Diablo 4 becomes similar to that, where you just last, 1 day or 2 days or something, and then you're like in the highest difficulties, and there's not really much left to do, and you kind of like ramp way too fast into like the late game, and nothing really stays a challenge. Everything becomes trivial. You one-shot the hardest bosses in the game. Anything outside of the pit is a joke, and people just get extremely jaded like, with that, because unlike Diablo 3, where people just came to accept that Greater Rifts is the game, in Diablo 4 we have a lot of game that is not the pit, and that just becomes completely trivialized, similar to how we've trivialized bounties and rifts and all that stuff in Torment 16 difficulty in Diablo 3. And I think for Diablo 4, the same will not work, because the game is just so much larger, there's so much more content that is outside of the pit, that is important to also be fun and engaging, because, well, we just need to actually use all that stuff and include some variety in the gameplay loop. And in some cases, we are even forced into those other types of content. For example, for the pit, we have to do a significant number of, for example, Whisper or Helltide farming or something, or Nightmare farming, in order to even get the keys to enter the pit and, do these kind of pushes. You have to do the same in Diablo 3, but to a much smaller degree. It's very fast to ramp up those keys. In Diablo 4, it's kind of slow, and you spend a lot of time actually going for that outside of the pit. And this means that you have to farm a lot of trivial content all the time. But enough of my rant for now, so I'm gonna conclude this video. It has gotten quite long now, but I just wanted to raise those points. It's just, some discussions I had on my streams and things that just kind of kept coming back into my mind about, like, why do I not enjoy Diablo 4's pit that much as Diablo 3? And I think that I kind of gave all the points now that at least I could think of. There's obviously, other reasons for other people to, enjoy or not enjoy a certain type of content. But I hope that in general, Blizzard is just gonna listen to this maybe. And of course, I've also given feedback in writing and various points and so on. And it's just kind of sad to see for me that, the pit has been in the game since season 4. That's half the seasons now, It's not little time, but it has not really changed at all in any significant way. We still don't have the leaderboards. We don't have like any, improvement to the system that makes it more fun, more engaging or anything. It's kind of like it was made and then it was just left there. And the only thing that ever changed was one boss was replaced by another one, and we have tormented stacks that most people don't care about. And this is it. For example, why don't we have a completely different rule set starting in pit 101? You can ramp up the monster damage a lot. You can, add extra elite affixes, add more elite affixes per elite. You can add more density of elites. You can add more auras and aura monsters, not just the champions that give the damage reduction aura, but maybe there's a haste aura, maybe there's, some damage aura, or, whatever. There's so much stuff that it can do. You can even give like tormented stacks to elite affixes that kind of like ramp up the difficulty more and more the more you get hit. Maybe those decay. Maybe you can also add a mechanic where those stacks decay over time, so that there's a bit of like a ebb and flow of incoming damage depending on what is going on, depending on how many hits you take, or stuff like that. I feel like there is so much potential to just make this more exciting, especially for the completely optional, pit 100 onwards, where you don't even get any reward for it anymore. The highest you have to clear is like something like a 95 or so to reliably get all of your glyphs to 100, and after that, nothing matters. And this means you have so much freedom to just make exciting stuff for the tryhards and actually give people something to really strive for, something to really chase, to really, just show their mastery of the game and the build that I have made. And that is just not a thing in Diablo 4 right now, where, after playing Diablo 3, I really realized how much I missed that. So let's see if something comes out of this. It's just like my thoughts on the whole topic. Overall, I will still focus more on Diablo 4. As I mentioned, it's, still fun in many other ways. It is still more fresh, it gets bigger updates, and I do see a bright future for the game ahead. But it really makes me sad to see, especially what the pit could be, but it just isn't. So yeah, that's it for me. Hope you enjoyed my thoughts. Let me know what you think, or maybe I really missed the mark of some of my points. Maybe there's some other concerns that you would like to raise. I guess this would be a good opportunity for me to like gather even more points and maybe eventually send like some comprehensive document or something to the devs, and maybe they'll take it to heart. So hope you like this, and I'll see you guys next time.